Greetings, everyone. My name is Peter Onen. I am a spiritual teacher, and if you want to learn more about me and the services that I offer, you can visit my website, peteronen.com. And today we have a special guest, Micki O'Brien. She is an alternative education leader, and today we're going to be talking about the topic of integral theory and what exactly that is. So first off, Micki, thank you for being here. And can you just let people know briefly what is an alternative education leader and where can people get a hold of you or learn more about you?
You can get a hold of me at MickiO'Brien.com. That's M as in Mary, I-C-K-I, O-B-R-I-E as in elephant, N, MickiO'Brien.com. You can also get a hold of me on Facebook and Twitter. I have a company that's not very active called Aligned Education. So you will find things about me there. And I'm starting a company called Neuro Uniqueness. And so that will be up on Facebook and Twitter and online soon. And an education leader, alternative education leader. It's kind of a unique thing that I created to label what I do, because I have studied and been a part of many different alternative educational modalities. And the underlying thing in that is democratic education, that children actually have a say in what's happening in their lives and in their schools. It either reduces or eliminates age segregation, so that people are working together instead of, all the 3-year-olds being together. And everyone that's involved in the school and in the community, their health and thriving is a part of what these schools do, what alternative education does. So there's even an alternative education movement called unschooling that I've been a part of. And I believe education can be and is becoming an ecosystem of many, many, many different kinds of education. And in my master's thesis, I created a model using integral theory of how we could have a framework of integral education that supported each person being on their own journey, no matter what age they're at. So it's a model for lifelong education.
Wow, that's beautiful. Okay.
Oh, and should I say, what I do is I consult with people and I coach for leadership and for building organizations and communities, or just notching them up, basically.
Yeah. You're a game changer.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Micki. Okay. So again, our topic today is integral theory. And so let's just jump right in. Micki, what is integral theory and how does it correlate with spiral dynamics?
Okay. So integral theory is a theory that the philosopher and author Ken Wilber put together. And it is literally a theory of everything. And it's got different pieces that kind of come together to form the whole entirety of the theory. And spiral dynamics is one of the most important, biggest pieces. And a piece implies that there's like some kind of, like in a machine, there's like a gear and another gear, and the piece implies that somehow they're these separate things, and they're not. They're these different interactive, but like in a
gears on a clock.
But they're not. You can't like take one piece out and have the other pieces exist by themselves. It's like in a living system. It's like in an organic, biological living system. So I always feel like piece sounds very mechanical, and that's not what it is. It's much more biological and energy. It's all interrelated.
Okay, it's all integral, really.
You could say that.
Yeah, definition of integral. Yeah, it's all integral. Yeah. Okay, so what is integral theory? Let's just broad, big picture. What is integral theory? How can we use it to our advantage, really? How can we use integral theory to our advantage? What is it?
So for me, integral theory has helped me be able to relate to myself and other people with a lot more compassion. And I know I've said this in interviews before, no one is bad, broken, or wrong. That is one of my most important mantras. And integral theory, including me, so no one is bad, broken, or wrong, including me. And integral theory is one of the tools I use the most in almost everything I do, because it allows me to support and celebrate everyone that I'm working with in their greatness and not expect them to be just like me or see things just like me or relate to the world just like me. So it's given me a tool to understand people's differences and people's uniqueness and still be able to support them, even if they're not exactly like me.
We also did an interview on spiral dynamics. So if you haven't watched that one yet, definitely watch that one. And you might want to just pause this one and watch that one first. So let's talk about, Micki, let's talk about the levels of spiral dynamics, and then just kind of use that as a platform to jump off into more exploration into this theory of everything that's called integral theory.
Okay, so spiral dynamics looks at levels of consciousness, which we also call worldviews, and we also call memes. And what happens is the spiral builds up, and then we have a quantum leap from lower levels of consciousness, which are still pretty high, to an integral level of consciousness. The spiral goes back and forth between individual and group, and the top 3 levels before going integral are what we dove into in this other video, which is right and wrong, good and evil, which is a very group level, and then scientific rational capitalism, which is a very individual level, and then civil rights, social justice, which we also sometimes call green, because a lot of environmental work is done at that level and relationship to the environment. And then there's this quantum leap that happens, and we start to go integral. And when we go integral, we actually start at integral at a very individual level, and we're often, pushing back pretty hard against what happened at civil rights, social justice. And then we start to move up into a more community-oriented integral level. So that's spiral dynamics. There's much more explained in the other video. Another piece of, and piece part, not exactly accurate again, is the quadrants. And here I want to say a term that you often hear in the integral community, and that's AQUAL. And the way I usually see it spelled is capital A, capital Q, capital A, capital L. And it's all quadrants, all levels, all lines. So you'll notice there's another AL in there. It's implied because it's integral, right? So all quadrants, all levels, all lines. And that starts to connect more to the quadrants. So that's what I'm going to really dive into right now, is the quadrants. And I want to say, as I'm doing this, I wrote my master's thesis at Naropa University on applying integral theory to education systems. So I might refer back to education systems a bit to give you examples sometimes, because that's where a lot of my expertise lies. And please know that, there are amazing integral scholars all over the world involved in the European Union, involved in different countries on different continents, South America, Africa. It's amazing how many beautiful integral scholars there are. So I don't want to say like there's no one way to just do integral right, because it's a living thing. And even in the levels of consciousness and spiral dynamics, our relationship to that changes. And I still kind of use the more old school Claire Graves, who was the creator of spiral dynamics. I still use a lot of his descriptions and relationship to spiral dynamics. So if you go and look someplace else, you might hear and see more of evolved different way, including Ken he's changed the colors related to the different levels. So know that this is the Micki O'Brien version of all of this, and it is a living thing that is constantly in growth and evolution. So I'm giving you a snapshot, like, and then you go back to a snapshot and like, okay, that's how it was at that point in time. It is constantly evolving. It is such a vibrant, amazing thing. The quadrants are so cool. Changed my life. Okay, so I want you to think, oh, look at that, totally works in the camera. So here's some quadrants. From the way you're looking at it, this side over here where my bracelet is, that's the internal. And this side over here, where my fingers are doing cool finger things, that is the external. So, and then if you go above, up here, that is the personal. And if you go below, that's the group. So let's see, internal, external. In the Western world, much of what we focus on is over here in the external individual. Over here is the internal individual. Down here is the group internal. And over here is the group external. Okay, now I'm going to take this line away and just talk about the difference between the internal and the external. Okay, and I'll get this out of my face. Okay, so in the external world, that's things you can see, you can measure. And in the internal world, those are things that are in our inner being. They're things you can't measure, you can't see. I mean, we've made some strides with biohacking and hacking consciousness and evolution. There are some people who are really doing amazing work around that. Like we found like forgiveness meditation. There's a way of hacking into our internal, that's incredible. And I use the word hacking with like respect and love. So don't think I'm being like, it's hacking. It's like incredible dive into what's possible for humanity. Okay. So in this external individual, that is where much of US culture and much of Western culture exists. It's what we can measure about individuals. It's what we see. It's where things actually happen. So like in education systems, we do testing and we think somehow we can like measure and see like what's happening inside. Many people who are very caught up in the external world and kind of really believe in that, like I always think of Missouri as the show me state, right? Like you can't, I think it's on their license plate. If you believe you have to see it, then you're living very much in the external world. And I have to speak for myself, my typology and the way that I'm wired, and I'm neuro unique, I'm neurodivergent. I really believe in this whole internal world. And in our internal world is where our beliefs are. It's where we go in our dreams. There's all, to me, there's a whole nother world there. And many times, if we're really focused on our external world, we're not even conscious of what's happening in our inner world. So what I did is I named my first company, I named it Aligned Education, because I was talking about what we do in the external world and what we believe in the internal world, that those align. And like right now, what I see happening in education is those things don't align. Our internal world, we profess values like freedom and opportunity. Our external world, we basically have created a prison system that we call the education system. And we want everybody to jump through hoops and fit in the herd and comply. And I'm not saying compliance is a completely wrong thing, because to get shit done, you have to comply sometimes. But what if you comply in partnership and relationship instead of complying because somebody set up a system? So this is another part of my basic belief system, which is organizations exist to serve us. We created them. They're ours. And we each are unique individuals who are very powerful. So this systems that exist that tell us that we have to be a certain way and do things a certain way and just comply and not ask questions and not align with our inner beliefs. You know, if one of your highest noble qualities and values is freedom, and you're told to go every day, step into a prison cell and jump when the guard tells you to jump, and they'll give you a good grade, that doesn't align to me. And I want to say here, there are many angels in conventional schools. I am not bad-mouthing the people who work in and go to conventional public schools, because there is so much love and so much good intention, and there are people doing amazing things in those schools. My purpose is about creating a different way of being with education and with ourselves and with our evolution. And it doesn't involve conventional public schools, because the foundation of what they're built on is the factory model. It's actually really simple. So I'm not involved in education reform or any of that kind of stuff anymore. And it's all because of this one piece between the internal and the external. Now, the other part of the quadrants are the personal above the line and the group below the line. So if we're so involved in the West, in the individual personal, and we have a lot of technology around that, right? We help individuals like be amazing Olympic athletes and be amazing innovators and things like that. In cultures that have a lot of internal personal or internal group technology, so things like the way I'm using technology, it involves some of the things I've learned from Ken Wilber, that meditation is a technology, mantras and spiritual practices, those are technologies. So like Tibetan cultures have these profound technologies for evolving in our internal world. And you might have somebody who is very spiritually evolved using technologies in the external world that aren't as evolved, like having oxen pull your cart, right? Like that's a technology. And now, you know, in many places we have technologies, we can fly stuff up in space, you know, that's a technology. So there are different technologies involved in the external and the internal world. And we tend to think, oh, that's just technology that, you know, we can measure and see, and that's made of mechanical parts. But things like compassion and forgiveness, we can actually develop those using inner technologies that work with our inner world.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
I love that. I love that. I've never heard anyone talk about this way.
And I got this, I believe I actually mentioned it in my master's thesis, and I don't remember if I heard Ken Wilber talking about it or if I read, because he's written many, many books. It was something that I heard from him though, about these different technologies, and it elevated my understanding of technology. And I've heard Vishen Lakhiani at Mind Valley. I've heard him refer to technology more in these ways. So in the quadrants, we can talk about lines of development. Mm-hmm. So get this, a lot of what we think is development in the Western world, and I don't want to speak for all of the Western world. I want to speak for my own experience in the United States and some other Western countries. I grew up as a military brat, so I've lived other places that were very focused over here in that external personal, right? So let's say in that external personal that there's a line of development. So let's say there's a line of development for innovation, and there's a line of development for getting good grades, like learning how to do that, how to jump through the right hoops. And there's a line of development for learning how to be an Olympic athlete, or just like amazing at something that you actually perform and do in the world, right? So there's infinite numbers of lines of developments in each quadrant. But in the external personal quadrant, those lines of development are about that part of life, the external personal part of life. So the internal personal part of life is we're developing lines around our own personal growth, around our own spirituality, around our own beliefs. Like Kelly LaRue she's created a technology that right now we're calling the 12 words that map your soul. And those 12 words are your highest noble qualities and they're your values. And I consider that technology largely, and again, you can't separate all these out really clearly, and you can do a hologram where you pull one spot on your map and your quadrants, you can pull one spot out and you can create a whole nother quadrant map. So that is a whole nother universe.
Lots of details and texture to this topic.
Yes. And I was going to stay more. Yes. Thank you. Okay. We're going to bubble back up. Okay. So these lines can develop in each quadrant. So you can develop these really high levels of consciousness, these really high spiritual places, yoga masters, spiritual masters, mystics, poets. You know, a poet might create a poem that you can read that often came from a very internal place, right? So they developed a high level of relationship to this internal richness. The internal of the group is often like the culture and the kind of unconscious beliefs of a group and a culture. Often you can get those here in the internal of the group. And the external of the group is where things like systems and structures happen. It's I have my undergraduate degree in sociology. So sociology happens in the external group. And cognitive dissonance happens in that jump between the internal and the external. And one of the things that I did with integral theory, with the quadrants in my master's thesis and in my work at different schools, is I help people learn to map where they're at in the quadrants, like so their strengths and their challenges in the quadrants. And then I do a thing called cross quadrant strengths building. So let's say that you're I had a student like this in my night school program, really, really brilliant physical intelligence. And he loved playing soccer, no skills with other people, like a total jerk. And I knew he wasn't, but he just didn't know how to relate to other people at all. He was a very internal person. And in the external world, he had this incredible physical intelligence. So what I did is, and I had like a huge say for the students that I had in this program, because I could support them getting a high school diploma by doing certain work. So his work was to be on a soccer team at a local high school and build his social skills using his strength as an amazing soccer player. And he evolved into a better person. So he had a very developed line in the external personal. And in that process, he developed a line in the external group because he started to relate to other people better. And his internal lines, they lengthened also. So one of the very best examples of this, which it's not my favorite thing in the world, but one of the very best examples of this is in the quadrants. Many, many spiritual teachers, they're very, very evolved spiritually, right? They're they're like off the charts. Their line of development spiritually is profound. And their line of development around their sexuality is not. It's very short. It is not very developed. And every pun you can come up with from that is totally intended. So we find many times that these very developed spiritual teachers will behave very immaturely around their sexuality, because that line of their development hasn't really evolved. All of their life force, all of their energy, all of their passion has gone into this line of development that's off the charts spiritually. That does not make them bad, broken, or wrong. It often causes a run-in with the law, and it can cause some serious suffering for some people, including the spiritual teacher, right? Like, brilliant spiritual teacher at the top of the world, engages in sexuality in a really unhealthy way, hurts a bunch of people, yeah, it's not the best thing in the world to have happening. It's not a good thing. And if we can help people, develop some of those lines that are stunted, right? That can be helpful. At the same time, we have to think about what happens with mastery. In order to achieve mastery, we really put our entire life force and our entire focus on that. And I am not trying to make any judgment calls here. That is not what I'm doing. I am explaining the lines, and I'm explaining how development happens in the different lines. Now, in the integral community, there has been some confusion of people trying to apply spiral dynamics to all different lines. Spiral dynamics looks at worldviews and moral development. It looks at consciousness. So only those particular, and I've even heard it just say that there's really just one line of development that is spiral dynamics. And I'm not, integral scholars work with this all the time, and that's not my field of expertise. I just like to be careful to make sure to say this, that the spiral and all the different lines, they don't necessarily correlate. There's one line in particular that correlates to spiral dynamics.
I just want to point out to everyone that our intention is to reach the lay person here. Micki is an academic, but that's not why I'm inviting her onto the show. I'm inviting her onto the show because she has this incredibly valuable information that the lay person can definitely take advantage of if they can understand it. And that's why we're keeping it simple.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit more about the internal personal and the internal group?
Yeah, that's where beliefs and values and culture lie. So in the personal internal, there are our own personal beliefs and values, and they're so we can do all this cross quadrant stuff where our individual values and beliefs are very shaped by the internal and the external of our culture, right? The forces around us, the beliefs around us, they're like water. We're like fish in water. We don't realize that we're in the water. So our assumptions lie here. This is the way a woman acts. This is the way a man acts. This is the way, if you ever hear somebody go can you believe they did that? Who does that? That's one of my favorites. Who does that? And I'm like, oh, that's one of your values. And it's probably a value that connects to the culture.
So is that, correct me if I'm wrong, is that an internal group thing?
It's kind of both.
Okay.
So that line between the group and the individual is often very blurred because we are such pack animals. We're so connected to each other until we get to certain levels of consciousness. And even there's still things that are hard for us to have an awareness of, because especially if you haven't spent time in cultures really different from yours, the brain learns by the perception of difference. And if you haven't had an experience of something really different, like Vishen Lakhiani talks about a tribe that doesn't drink water. They drink a thing made from this plant that the women in the tribe chew, and they spit, and it's this, and there's all these there's millions of people going around going, we have to drink all this water every day, and there's this entire group of people that drink no water.
Wow.
I know, right?
Right.
That's that's an example of how this works.
If you could say one last thing about integral theory and how understanding the big concepts, not necessarily the details, but just knowing what it is and a little bit about how it plays into our lives. If you could say one last thing to people about why it's important or why you feel that it's valuable to know this information, and then we'll wrap it up.
No one is bad, broken, or wrong, including you. And being able to understand where someone else stands, what their perspective is, and how it's different from yours, and honor and respect them in that, while at the same time honoring and respecting yourself. That is such a big part of the difference this has made for me. And in leadership, being able to understand this, including the leadership in your own life and the leadership with your own family, and any like leadership roles you play in groups or organizations, being able to understand where people are at and support them, not use this as a weapon, but like if you push back against somebody where they're at, you know what they do? They dig their heels in because they believe that's who they are. And this is one of the greatest gifts that both meditation and integral theory have given me, is this ability to move into observer's mind, which I can't always do if I'm super caught up in believing that I'm right and my value is the truth. Then I'm screwed. I've got no ability to move. And I've found that integral theory has given me much more space to move in compassion and intelligence and love. So that's why I use it. And that's why I encourage you, if it speaks to you, to explore it. Look at Ken's books, look at Spiral Dynamic Integral, look at my work. There's many, many other integral theory academics and scholars. It's such an incredible way of relating to the political world so that you don't have to get caught in the victim consciousness and the suffering and the focusing on what we don't want. We live in a beautiful world that is very interconnected, and there is so much opportunity for us to continue to connect and evolve and to celebrate being alive. And I have found integral theory is one of the best ways to bring me back to that center, that alignment, and that connection.
Beautiful. Perfect. Thank you so much, Micki. I just wanted to say one last thing. If you're a spiritual teacher watching this interview, let me just give you a little bit of how I use integral theory in my life. Is I understand this information from a much more intuitive level, whereas Micki understands the academic side. And I use this as a spiritual teacher to simply know where people are. I can use my intuition to realize where they are. This is not a value judgment. This is knowing what currently is, and then I can take it from there and help them with tools and strategies that work for them where they currently are. And that's really the reason why I love integral theory and spiral dynamics, is because I can understand my world so much better, and I can help people much more effectively if I can understand without judging them where they are. And that's why I want to just talk to you for a minute, if you're a spiritual teacher, why this is really helpful information for you to know. All right, and with that, thank you very much, Micki, and thank you for joining us, and have a great day. Bye.
Bye.